What is up, fellow nerds, and welcome back to the Dapper Snapper Gaming channel, and welcome back to How Do I Want to Do This? This is our series where we take a look at all playable options available to players in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, then we rank them on a scale of 1 to 10, and either build them or fix them depending on how they rank. Now today we begin talking about yet another Matt Mercer subclass, this time within the Paladin kit. So we're going to be talking about the Oath of the Open Sea Paladin, Ford himself. And I'm very excited to see how this does. Is it too specific to water-based things, or does it work in pretty much any situation? We are just gonna have to find that out today. But before we do, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. As you can see, most people who watch the channel are not subscribed, so please don't be one of those people. Help us to reach our goal of 5,000 by the end of this year. I really think that we can do it, but of course I need your help in order to get there. And so of course, make sure you also share the video with your friends and click the bell so you're notified when new videos are uploaded. So the Oath of this Open Sea Paladin, of course, was introduced in Campaign 2 of Critical Role, with Ford, of course, being the main recipient of that, starting off as a Hexblade Warlock, which we see a lot of, then, of course, going Paladin when Ukutoa became a bit of an issue. This is a really interesting subclass that, of course, seeks to look at not only a sailor, but also just an explorer in general. So, you know, this is somebody that is focused on the elements, is out on the water a lot, is liking to explore different islands, different countries, different places, all that kind of thing. And so this seeks to embody that sort of thing. But when you look at something that is kind of specific like this, a lot of times what you'll run into is something that is really good if it has to do with naval combat or something having to do with the water, but then as soon as you get on land, it becomes a little bit mediocre. We're gonna have to find out if that is how it is, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Starting off, of course, we have our Oath spells, our expanded spell list, and we get an interesting mix of spells here. Number one, we get a lot of movement-based spells, which is really good, actually. One of the tenets of this subclass, of course, is to explore the uncharted, to live free, right? The first tenet is no greater life than a life lived free. And so a lot of these spells actually seek to do that, right? We've got Expeditious Retreat, we've got Misty Step, we've got Freedom of Movement, that kind of thing. We also have two unique spells on here in Freedom of Waves and Freedom of the Winds. Now, these are technically homebrew, but I'm assuming that you would be using these if you are using any kind of Matt Mercer stuff. And so these are unique. I do want to go through these just because they are not technically official spells, but they do come on this kit. And I want to talk about a little bit of a problem that I have with one of them and why it kind of affects my ranking. So Freedom of the Waves is kind of interesting. You have a cylinder that you can create of water, and it of course can take on several different types of forms. Every creature that is within the area has to make a strength saving throw, or they take some bludgeoning damage and fall prone, which isn't too bad, right? And of course, we can also choose certain creatures to succeed on this saving throw if we want to. And then beyond that, if we are within that area, we can use that water to teleport ourselves to somewhere else. So that's not terrible, right? It kind of reminds me of Vortex Warp, kind of, but it's a little bit better, and hopefully it is because it's a higher level spell. So I kind of like this. I think it's decent. The one that I have more of an issue with, though, is Freedom of the Winds. Freedom of the Winds is a 5th level spell, right? And so you gain a flying speed of 60 feet. That's great. You have advantage on ability checks to avoid being grappled and on saving throws against being restrained or paralyzed. Also sounds pretty good if that comes up. And whenever we are targeted with a spell or attack, we can use a reaction to teleport 60 feet away and possibly outside of the range of said attack. And if we are to get outside of that range, then of course that attack will not go off, and the spell will then end once we reappear. We normally would be concentrating on this in order to have the flying speed, but if we use it in that way, then we will of course lose concentration on it. Now, the problem I have with this spell is it actually ends up kind of butting heads with our aura that we're going to get at 7th level. I'll go into that a little bit more at 7th level once we actually talk about that, but just know that there is some overlap here between a feature we get at 7th level and a spell that we get at 17th level. So it does kind of feel bad to get a powerful spell that is normally not on our spell list, that is kind of redundant in several ways to something that we've had for a long time. You know, this spell is not normally on the Paladin spell list. It is a Druid, Ranger, and Sorcerer spell, same with Freedom of the Waves. And so it is nice to be getting something unique, but at the same time, I would rather get something that does something that goes a little bit further, especially for a 5th level spell slot, right? That's a hefty smite that I could be laying down. So I better get a lot of value out of this spell. And unfortunately, it ends up being a little bit redundant. So that one's not the best, right? But freedom of movement, control water, call lightning, freedom of the waves, misty step, expeditious retreat, all of those are pretty good. Augury's not too bad. There's a lot to love here, right? But of course, up at that top level, it's a little bit questionable, I would say. And so for that reason, I don't think that I can quite give it a perfect ranking. Overall, though, I think this deserves an 8 out of 10. I think it's a good list. It does have some issues though with synergy and or lack thereof with the rest of the kit, unfortunately. Also at level 3, we get our channel divinity options as always, and so we get 2 that are unique to this subclass. The first of which is called Marine Layer, and this one is very unique actually. So we can create a fog around us that is 20 feet in all directions as an action. So it remains centered on us while we are moving around, and so that area becomes heavily obscured. Us and every creature that's within 5 feet of us is instead treated as lightly obscured, and it lasts for 10 minutes, goes around corners, all that good stuff. We also get Fury of the Tides, and so as a bonus action, we can power up our weapon attacks for the next minute. So once per turn while we're doing this, whenever we hit a creature with a weapon attack, we can push that creature 10 feet away from us. And of course, if it is pushed into an obstacle or another creature, it will then take bludgeoning damage equal to our charisma modifier. These are very unique options, very unique. I don't know that there is anything else out there like it as far as channel divinity options. So basically we get Fog Cloud, kind of. It's a slightly modified version of Fog Cloud. It's a little bit better depending on who you ask, right? And so it can end up leading to some pretty interesting situations. It's kind of a get out of jail free card is the general gist of it. I tend to think of the blind fighting style when I think of this, in order to make sure that I can see despite everything being obscured. And so that might be something that you're going to want to have on a build like this if you're going to want to take full advantage of this feature. Fury of the Tides is also interesting because we can push people 10 feet away when we hit them with a weapon attack. Again, there is no saving throw to this. So I think of something like the Crusher feat, right? To push them away as part of the attack. I think of something like the Telekinetic feat, right? To push them again once we've activated this on the first turn. Our bonus action will be free to do something else, and we could then telekinetic shove them even further. I just think of different ways that we can force enemy movement, which is pretty effective as always. And so there are some pretty cool things that we could possibly do with something like this. Neither of these are bad. I will say that I think Marine Layer is a little bit more situational. And I kind of make the argument, the same thing like what I talked about last week when I did my build guide, of course, on the Oathbreaker Paladin. We talked about using the Darkness spell in amongst a bunch of your allies and how that can be kind of disruptive. This could be the same way. And so I would be very careful about when I use this, just because you may end up making your allies not so big of a fan of you. So just be careful with that. But Fury of the Tides is pretty cool. And so overall, I think these are both pretty decent. I definitely can't give it a perfect rating because I think there would be ways to fix this. And I think there would be ways to make it a little bit better. Like, you know, you being able to see in your own fog That would have been pretty good. But I mean, overall, it's still not that bad. I think I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I think it's pretty good, and I can definitely see situations where I could use both of these. At level 7, we get Aura of Liberation, and this, of course, is our normal aura that we get that extends 10 feet out from us and will go to 30 feet at level 18. What does this one do? Well, again, like what we said earlier, there is a focus on this subclass when it comes to being able to move freely and being able to just do whatever you want, right? So as long as you're not incapacitated, us and creatures within that aura cannot be grappled or restrained, and we ignore any penalties on movement and attacks while underwater. Creatures that are already grappled or restrained when they enter the area can spend 5 feet of movement to auto escape as long as the restraint is not magical. So this feature has a few things that I find to be a little bit problematic, right? It is our main aura, right? So it needs to be pretty good. And unfortunately, I think it falls a little bit short, but it's also really good at the same time. Let me explain what I'm talking about. So with this, we essentially have freedom of movement all the time, right? That's kind of the gist of what this aura is. However, it becomes kind of redundant with some of the spells that we've gotten, right? We get freedom of movement at level 13 and we get freedom of the winds at level 17, and both of those do somewhat similar things. And so for us to lose out on 2 spells on our spell list in order to just get it back with our aura is kind of weird, right? It just seems like a strange design that I don't know. I just think it's a little bit short-sighted. And so I don't know if that should take away from the aura or if that should take away from the spell list. I guess it should take away from the spell list. I don't know. But the aura is pretty good, right? I mean, being able to have freedom of movement essentially on all the time and to be able to share that with allies is pretty good. And so I really can't really talk down too much on it, but just know that there are 2 spells on your list that are your high level spells that just kind of get eaten by this Aura of Liberation. So for that reason, it's a little redundant in that way, but it's still pretty good. Overall, I've got to give this an 8 out of 10. Freedom of movement is a great spell, and being able to essentially have that on at all times is pretty dang good. At level 15, we get Stormy Waters, and this just gives you another way to use your reaction. So whenever a creature moves into or out of our reach, then it will take 1d12 bludgeoning damage automatically and must succeed on a strength saving throw against our save DC or be knocked prone. Now, this is a very simple feature, right? And so I think that it's not difficult to kind of get where this is going. However, one thing that's interesting is it just says whenever a creature moves into or out of your range, right? This doesn't necessarily specify whether or not the movement can or has to be forced movement or voluntary movement, because we have ways to force people outside of our range constantly with Fury of the Tides, right? And so I tried to look online for an errata for this. I didn't see anything. So if Matt Mercer has commented on this and I didn't see it, hit me up in the comments down below. But to me, I read this as that they don't necessarily work together. I read this as the creature has to be the one that moves itself in or out of your range. But I might be wrong. I might be completely wrong in that. So if that's the case, definitely add a few to this ranking, because I don't think that it's all that great when we can't force it ourselves, right? Because that would be pretty cool, right? We hit them with an attack, they get pushed, we immediately hit them again, right? And so that would be pretty cool. And then we could knock them prone. Then on the second attack, we have advantage. And so it could just stack like that. But yeah, ultimately that's one thing that I don't believe works that way. So for that reason, it's a little bit less effective. It's still pretty good though, right? Free damage is free damage. And when somebody just comes up to engage you, that thing could just be knocked down, and then you've got advantage on everything if they've run out of movement, right? If they don't have half their movement left, they're on the ground and they can't get back up. And that's free advantage for you. So it's not to say that this is a bad feature at all whatsoever, right? This is a huge waste of movement speed for your enemies, and so it's still quite good. The 1d12 bludgeon damage is whatever, but the prone condition is really where the value in this lies. So I like it. I think it's pretty good. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I think it's a pretty dang good feature. I think that if it combos with Fury of the Tides, I probably would go to a 10 out of 10 on it. But I think otherwise I've got to give it an 8 how it stands. At level 20, we get Mythic Swashbuckler, and of course we get our OP crazy Paladin feature that every Paladin gets. And so how OP is ours on this subclass? So let's find out. As an action, of course, on our turn, we can activate this for 1 minute, just like pretty much every other one is almost. And so we get a few things. So number 1, we have advantage on athletics checks, and we gain a climbing speed equal to our walking speed. And if we already had a climbing speed from a race thing or whatever, then it is doubled. Next up, if we're within 5 feet of a creature and no other creatures are within 5 feet of us, we have advantage on attack rolls against that creature. Very useful. We can dash or disengage as a bonus action, and we have advantage on dexterity checks and dexterity saving throws against effects that we can see. What is this feature? Like, this is kind of insane, right? So we have advantage on athletics checks and we get a climbing speed. I will say that's the worst part of this, and that's pretty good, right? That's pretty good, but that's the worst thing that we get here. Gaining advantage against a creature that's within 5 feet of us is kind of insane, right? This is similar to the Swashbuckler Rogue, although that Rogue does not gain advantage, it just gains sneak attack in that case under these same rules, but us gaining advantage is kind of huge, right? So that's pretty nice. Taking dash or disengage action as a bonus action, that is amazing for a Paladin. Absolutely amazing. And then we get danger sense kind of from the Barbarian kit. So we're just kind of dipping into some of the best stuff from Rogue and Barbarian, and it's really, really strong. This is a 10 out of 10. I don't know what to tell you. This is an absolutely insanely good capstone. And so if you get to level 20 and get to play this, you're going to feel really powerful during this minute. So what do we think of the Open Sea Paladin overall? Whenever you look at Matt Mercer subclasses, I think that you end up seeing one thing or the other. You end up seeing it being completely crap, like what we've seen with like the Rune Child Sorcerer, which we have yet to cover on this channel, but we will be at least sometime in the future. Or you end up with something like this. You end up something like the Graviturgist Wizard, the Chronergist Wizard, things that are just considered to be insane, right? We've talked about the Echo Knight Fighter on the channel before. That's, of course, up in the iCard above for you to check out. We talked about the Juggernaut Barbarian, which wasn't as OP, but it was still pretty good. We talked about, what's another one that we talked about? We talked about his Bard that he put out not too long ago, his Tragedy Bard. That thing's insanely good. So there really is no in between for Matt, or at least it's incredibly rare. He knows what is powerful and he knows how to make things work together. And I think that overall it is a satisfying kit outside of the hiccup between Aura of Liberation and then Freedom of Movement and Freedom of the Winds. Besides those having a little bit of a clash, I think it really is a really cool kit for the Paladin. It gives you a lot of movement options, which Paladins are really not known for. It gives you the ability to deal a little bit of extra damage with your charisma modifier. Again, this really, really encourages you to take a level in Hexblade, but at the same time, it really discourages you if you're going to level 20 because a Mythic Swashbuckler is just so insane. So it's kind of sending mixed signals in that way. So you really want a good strength, you really want a good charisma, and you're just going to want to try to boost those as quickly as you possibly can because they both do a whole lot for you. The Stormy Waters, if that works with Fury of the Tides, I think you're kind of OP. If it doesn't, then you're still really good, but not quite as OP. Of course, I'm operating on the fact that those do not work together, but if Matt has said they work together, then they work together, and that'll be great. Overall, though, I've got to give this a 9 out of 10. This is a really good Paladin. It is really strong. It is not pigeonholed into just working on the water. This thing will work absolutely anywhere, and I think that you would have a blast playing one of these. So what do you think? Let me know down below what you think of the OpenSea Paladin. Of course, we are going to be building one of these later this week, and I hope you guys will stick around for that. Of course, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss when that goes live. And until then, stay safe out there, stay healthy. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.